David Miller was 35 years old, and his life was very quiet. He did not need an alarm anymore because his body was used to the routine. Staring at the wall, then slowly stood up. No voices, only the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. Outside, people were already moving, cars passing. David watched them, but he felt like he was not really part of that world. David worked as an accountant in a small company, but his days felt the same. He took the same bus. He walked the same streets. His coworkers knew him as a quiet and serious man. Sometimes during lunch break, he told himself that he preferred being alone. Years ago, David was different. He used to help people, but life had slowly changed him. When his closest friend moved to another country and stopped calling, and when his boss took credit for his hard work, David felt angry and disappointed. He stopped opening doors for others. He stopped offering help. People only care about themselves. One cold Monday morning, David stood at the bus stop, waiting as usual. People stood close to each other, but no one spoke. Her coat was thin, and her hands were shaking as she held a large bag. "It's not my problem," he thought. Apples rolled across the sidewalk, some stopping near people's shoes. People walked past her. David watched everything. Then, without warning, a memory came into his mind. Kindness costs nothing. David, she used to say, every morning, he woke up at exactly 6:30. He sat on the edge of his bed for a few seconds. His apartment was small and silent. No laughter. David made himself a cup of coffee and drank it while standing near the window. Children walking to school, neighbors talking. He felt invisible. His job was stable, and his salary was enough to live comfortably. Every day looked exactly like the one before it. He sat in the same seat, at work. David spoke only when necessary. They respected him, but they did not know him. He sat alone and watched others talk and laugh together. But deep inside, he felt something missing. He used to smile more. He used to believe that kindness mattered. When his parents passed away, he felt alone for the first time. David felt forgotten. Little by little, David stopped caring. He stopped saying, "Good morning," in his mind. He repeated the same thought again and again. Kindness is useless. The sky was gray, and the air was sharp and cold. An old woman stood a few steps away from David. She looked weak and tired. David noticed her, but he quickly looked away. Suddenly, the bag slipped from the woman's hands and fell to the ground. The woman bent down slowly, struggling to pick them up. No one stopped. For a moment, he felt nothing. His mother's voice, but it can change someone's whole day. David felt uncomfortable. He did not want to remember that voice. He did not want to feel anything, but his feet moved before his mind could stop them. He stepped forward. He bent down and picked up an apple, then another, and another. The old woman looked up at him with surprise in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. Her smile was small but warm. David handed her the bag and nodded. He did not say much. He did not know what to say. When the bus arrived, they both got on. The woman sat down, still smiling to herself. David stood near the door holding the pole. Something felt different. Not big, not loud, just different. As the bus moved forward, David looked at his reflection in the window. For the first time in a long time, his face did not look empty. He did not understand why, but deep inside, something had begun to change. That entire day, David could not stop thinking about the old woman at the bus stop. He sat at his desk, staring at numbers on his computer screen. But his mind was somewhere else. Every few minutes, the image of her warm smile returned to him. It confused him. Helping her was such a small thing. He had only picked up a few apples. Yet the feeling stayed with him, quietly following him through the day. During lunch break, David walked to the small cafe near his office. He usually ordered his food, paid, and left without saying much. Today, when the cashier handed him his coffee, David looked up. "Thank you," he said clearly. The cashier blinked, surprised, then smiled. "You're welcome. Have a nice day." David walked away slowly. His chest felt light again. Later that afternoon, he noticed his coworker Sarah struggling with a stack of papers. They were about to fall from her hands. Normally, David would have looked away, but this time he stood up. "Do you need help?" he asked. Sarah looked at him surprised. "Oh, yes, please." David helped her organize the papers and carry them to her desk. "Thanks, David," she said. "That really helped." David nodded and returned to his seat. He tried to focus on his work, but a small smile appeared on his face without him noticing. That evening, as David walked home, the city felt different. The streets were the same, the buildings were the same, but something inside him had shifted. He thought about his belief. Kindness is useless. Was it really true? At home, David sat on his couch and stared at the ceiling. He remembered how kind he used to be, and how slowly he had closed himself off from others. "Maybe I was wrong," he whispered. The next morning, David made a quiet decision. He would try being kind again, not for others, but for himself. On the bus, he gave his seat to a tired-looking man. At work, he greeted people first. At lunch, he sat closer to others instead of choosing an empty table. Not everyone reacted. Some people ignored him. Some people looked confused. Some people smiled. But David did not stop. A few days later, on his way home, David noticed a man sitting on the sidewalk near the grocery store. The man's clothes were dirty and his face looked tired and worn. A small cardboard sign lay beside him. "Hungry, anything helps." David slowed his steps. He had seen homeless people many times before. He always told himself he could not help everyone. He always walked past them. But this time he stopped. The man looked up, clearly surprised. "Hello?" David said, unsure of himself. "Hello," the man replied quietly. David hesitated, then asked, "Have you eaten today?" The man shook his head. David went into the store and bought a sandwich and a bottle of water. When he came back, he handed them to the man. The man's hands trembled as he took them. "Thank you," he said. "You don't know how much this means." David sat down on the curb beside him. "My name is David," he said. "Michael," the man replied. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Michael began to speak. He talked about losing his job, about losing his home, about losing contact with his family. David listened. He did not interrupt. He did not judge. He simply listened. For the first time in a long while, Michael felt like someone saw him as a human being. When David stood up to leave, Michael looked at him and said something David would never forget. "You didn't just give me food," Michael said. "You gave me hope." David walked home slowly, his eyes wet with tears. That night he slept deeply, and for the first time in years he felt peaceful. Days turned into weeks, and David's life began to change in ways he did not expect. He did not suddenly become rich or famous. His job stayed the same, and his apartment was still quiet at night. But something inside him felt alive again. David continued his small acts of kindness. He held doors open. He smiled at strangers. He listened when people spoke. At first, these actions felt strange, almost uncomfortable, but slowly they became natural. One morning at work, David's boss called him into his office. David felt nervous. Usually, this meant something was wrong. But this time, his boss said something unexpected. "I've noticed your attitude lately," his boss said. "You've been very positive and helpful. The team works better because of it." David was shocked. "Thank you," he replied quietly. When David returned to his desk, Sarah looked at him and smiled. "Coffee after work?" she asked. David hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Sure." That evening, they sat in a small cafe and talked not about work, but about life. Sarah shared her dreams and fears, and David shared his own loneliness. For the first time in years, David felt connected to someone. Meanwhile, David did not forget Michael. Every few days, he brought him food. Sometimes they just talked. Other times, they sat in silence together. Every few days, he brought him food. Sometimes they just talked. Other times, they sat in silence together. David helped Michael write a simple resume. He searched for local shelters and job opportunities. He did not promise miracles, but he stayed, and that made all the difference. One rainy afternoon, David saw something that surprised him. Michael was sharing his food with another homeless man. "Why did you do that?" David asked. Michael smiled. "Because someone once shared with me." David understood then. Kindness was like a ripple in water. One small action moved outward, touching lives in ways you could not see. Months passed. Michael found a temporary job at a community center. It was not much, but it gave him purpose. He started standing taller, speaking with more confidence. David's own life improved too. He laughed more. He spoke more. He felt less alone. One evening, as David walked home under the city lights, he thought about his old belief. Kindness is useless. He smiled to himself. He knew now that it was wrong. Kindness had changed Michael's life. It had changed his own life, and it was still spreading. Like ripples on water growing wider and wider. 1 year passed. David often thought about how much his life had changed in such a short time. Not because of money, success, or luck, but because of a simple decision to be kind. He was no longer the quiet man who avoided people. He still enjoyed silence, but it no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. David now volunteered every weekend at the community center where Michael worked. They served meals, organized donations, and talked with people who needed help. Michael looked different now. He wore clean clothes. He smiled easily. He spoke with confidence. One afternoon, a new volunteer arrived, a young woman who looked nervous and unsure. She stood near the door, holding her bag tightly. David noticed her. He walked over and smiled. "First day?" She nodded. "Yes, I'm not sure I belong here." David remembered himself from a year ago. "You do," he said gently. "Just start small." The woman smiled, relieved. Later that day, David and Michael sat together after everyone had left. The room was quiet, filled with the soft sound of cleaning in the distance. "You know," Michael said, "if you hadn't stopped that day, I don't know where I'd be now." David shook his head. "I only bought you a sandwich." Michael laughed softly. "No, you saw me. That's what mattered." That evening, David walked home under the warm glow of streetlights. The city felt alive, but no longer distant. At the same bus stop where everything had begun, David noticed an old woman struggling with her bag. Before he could move, someone else stepped forward and helped her. David smiled. The ripple continued. He finally understood the truth his mother had always known. Kindness is never small. Kindness is never wasted. Kindness always returns, and sometimes it changes everything. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs kindness today. Write in the comments, Kindness is powerful. If you are learning English and enjoy stories like this, subscribe to English A Days and turn on the bell icon. Every story helps you improve your English, and every act of kindness makes the world better. Thank you for listening. See you in the next story.